Hello and welcome. I'm Maria Ressa. This is Rappler Talk. It is a special midnight edition in Manila, but it is not midnight over in California, where we're speaking with Salim Ismail. He is the executive founding director of Singularity University. It's a think tank in Silicon Valley that focuses on the future, and he's also the author of a book that I really loved. It's called Exponential Organization. Salim, thank you for joining us.
It's great to be here.
You seem to have made your careers, numerous careers, on finding the big ideas of the moment. I mean, what ideas excite you right now?
Well, we've seen for 50, 60 years the exponential growth in computing. The amount of computing in our handheld devices is unbelievable. What's really exciting today is that same acceleration, the doubling known as Moore's Law, is happening in about a dozen technologies like drones, 3D printing, neuroscience, biotech, robotics. And we now have about a dozen technologies doubling, and we get very, very excited by that upside, the potential that results in that.
And what does that mean? What's the impact on society, on businesses, and on society?
Sure. So, well, you take drones, for example, right? Today, the underlying technologies of batteries and GPS and stabilizers and AI algorithms is resulting in, today, a drone can carry about an 8-kilo package, about 10 kilometers. But the underlying technologies are moving so fast, those are doubling in their capability every 9 months. So in a little early next year, it's carrying 16 kilos. By the end of next year, 32 kilos, and that will just keep going. And so that means if you have a drone system that can carry packages, every 9 months, the weight of the package can double. And that gets us hugely excited because the upside potential is enormous if you can harness that doubling pattern.
So you're talking about drones, but which particular industries right now are really transformational, are changing in transformational ways?
Yeah, we've seen the rapid transformation that's happened in business, music, media, your kind of industry.
Absolutely.
Because of the digitization of it. But now we're seeing that happen with cars, with taxis, with hotels, with all sorts of things that are becoming information enabled. Healthcare, transportation. Maybe the most dramatic is energy, because of the price performance of solar cells is doubling every year, meaning that in 15 years or so, we'll have 100% of world energy supply that can be delivered by solar.
Meaning virtually free.
Virtually free, but certainly very, very low cost, and which will make us independent of all the oil that we need. This will, of course, have a huge geopolitical impact. The Middle East will kind of collapse. The U.S. will have to find other reasons to go to war, et cetera, et cetera. So all sorts of implications of that.
And
that's just solar.
Right, right. So your book is called Exponential Organizations. This is exponential change. I mean, so you're describing the technology that's there. What's the impact on people?
Well, the impact on people is twofold. At one level, the technologies are moving very, very rapidly. And there's two impacts on people. One is a very positive impact because we're essentially lifting the world out of poverty with all of this technology. We have communications. Within 5 or 6 years, the entire world will have a smartphone and have access to internet globally, which will be quite profound. That's the positive side. The negative side is that you have groups of people that can't take this pace of change. We're seeing a kind of an unparalleled rise in fundamentalism, whether it's the Hindus in India, the Muslims all over the place, the Christians, the Jewish settlers, all saying, I can't take this pace of change. Let's go back to, quote unquote, an older time when things were better. Right now, of course, it's a flawed argument. We're in the best time we've ever been. But the mind doesn't see that. And so there's this enormous tension now with part of the world moving very rapidly this way and pieces of society saying, let's go back. And so that's causing a lot of stress.
So taking that fundamentalism into politics, I mean, we're also seeing this rise of strongman kind of leaders, right? Charismatic leaders. Modi in India, Venezuela, the Philippines. Right. We have a Duterte, and the rise of Trump in the U.S. What is this doing for political systems and governance?
Well, this actually is a complete mess. I mean, look at democracy. We invented representative democracies when information was scarce. If you were in Washington, D.C., you had no idea what was happening in California. The speed of horse was as fast as something could travel. Today, we have an abundance of information, and democracies actually slow us down, right? And because you have this asymmetry of information and you can apply a lot of misinformation because of the real-time nature of it, there's no ability to fact-check, et cetera. It will actually destroy democracy. It simply doesn't work in today's world. And so we have to figure out, what does that future look like, and how do we evolve into new political systems, because the current ones will not work in our world.
So it also seems to have opened a Pandora's box. When you say destroy democracy, it makes me palpitate. I mean, we're also seeing great anger and hatred, right? That
That's right.
comes with this. So
That's right. And it's not that that wasn't there before. It's just that now that we're enabling much more information to come out, and we're learning more about the world. That was always there. We just now can see it. A few hundred years ago, if you had an Assad wiping out his own people, you wouldn't hear about it.
right.
We have the ability to track it in real time, in high definition, stream to 20 devices, and it makes us think of the world in a much worse place. In aggregate, the amount of violence and death and political violence is much lower overall, but we see the negatives, and so we get highlighted by that.
You said destroy democracy. What are the alternatives? So you've described a difficult place now. What do you see coming out of this?
The problem is we don't know. We've never been in this situation, right? Winston Churchill, I think, put it best. He said democracy is the worst form of government, except for everything else, right? The big question is, what do we do? Now, I'll give you an example. If you scoured and had a machine learning AI analyze all of the blog posts and tweets of everybody in the US or everybody in the Philippines, you could very quickly figure out what's their position on privacy or immigration, and drive policy with that. And so we can do automatic polling systems and do direct democracy, real time sentiment analysis of how people are feeling about things. Our political democracies have some positive points, but they tend to make the right decision. For example, like women's rights,
right.
But they take a long time to get there because you have to pull the whole population around. Right? We're in a world where we have to make decisions faster and faster, and that's incompatible with the way democracy works. Also, we tend to kind of end up devolved to high metabolism, short-term election cycles.
Right.
Nobody's thinking about the long-term needs of the country. Right? And so we've been thinking a lot at Singularity University about how do we solve this. We've started to run some experiments on what would it look like to do voting systems based on the blockchain, or different kinds of policy formulation in new ways. Our current efforts are, let's at least, most public policies determine defensively and reactively, right? Can we at least, as a starting point, have our policymakers aware of what technology is coming?
Right.
So we're not always pointed backwards into the future.
Right. Are you succeeding in that? I guess when you say faster and faster, a voting system and blockchain, blockchain would be this, for some of our viewers, the system behind Bitcoin.
Yeah, which is one of the most disruptive technologies with enormous potential to decentralize authentication and allow us to have wonderfully new trust-based systems that don't have corruption involved. And so there's some enormous potential from that.
I have to ask you about the violence and hatred that the internet has unleashed, because it's one of the topics that we're zoomed in on here in the Philippines. How do you deal with that? Is that a byproduct of the technology, or the way people are using it? What's the change that's there?
It's a bit of both, just because when you can anonymously spout vitriol, et cetera, you kind of do expose the worst nature in human beings. And that gets fully out there. And then it's on the record forever, permanently marked. It's enormously, online bullying is a huge problem, et cetera. Overall, it has some negative characteristics.
Right.
You could look at the high level and say you're better off exposing it than you know that you can deal with it, right? And so I think in general we tend to be positive because the aggregate positive effects of all of this technology far outweigh the negative. We tend to fixate on negative because we have this amygdala that's always scanning for bad news. And so, when we were evolving on the plains of Africa, if you heard a noise in the bushes, you ran, right? Because bad news could kill you. We're actually 10 times more likely to listen to bad news than good news, right? Which is why Fox News in the U.S. does so well. If you watch that, you're pretty much going to die this week. If you're really lucky, you'll last till next week, but then you'll die next week, right? And so we have to figure out how to program our biology away from that, and kind of have it reflect a bit better the fact that we're in the safest, most prosperous time ever.
So you remain positive despite the negative impact?
We're hugely excited for a very fundamental reason. We have the view that technology is a major driver of progress in the world. right? Maybe the only major driver we've ever seen. Now that we have a dozen technologies accelerating, we get very excited about that because each technology is doubling in its capability anywhere from 18 to 30 months. But where they intersect, that
Yes.
adds a whole other multiplier effect. Right? And the aggregate effect is quite profound. You know, in the 1500s, we had the Gutenberg moment,
Yeah.
and the printing
Yep.
press changed everything.
Yep.
It's like today we have 30 of those at the same time, right? Which
And
has enormous possible positive implications. But of course, society has a tough time absorbing that pace of change.
and the people who have to use it. I mean, you mentioned 30 different ones. Could you give us like the top two? What are the ones we should be watching?
I mean, I'll rattle off a few.
Please.
Autonomous cars,
Yep.
drones, Bitcoin, CRISPR. In neuroscience, the resolution at which we can image the brain is doubling every year. Solar energy, deep learning. I could just keep going on, but there's dozens of technologies, and then each one, as they intersect, creates a whole new application set that then ripples upwards into industries. And we're actually seeing the potential for having almost every industry that we can spot will be facing massive disruption in the next decade.
Fantastic. You mentioned CRISPR, genetic engineering, right?
Yeah. I mean, we've been able to do genetic engineering for a while, like Dolly the sheep and so on, but
Right.
it's been highly expensive and full of mistakes. CRISPR is a very elegant way that bacteria found to defend themselves against viruses. We've reverse engineered it. Now we can do genetic engineering like copying and pasting in a Word document. Okay, this is quite profound. The Chinese are already editing embryos in the womb. And so this really now, a human being now becomes a software engineering problem.
Okay, that's
And
really
that has enormous implications of that. And as we kind of, you know, all of our old institutions like legal systems, healthcare systems, if you try and update them and do disruptive change to bring them up to speed, there's an immune system response, and the immune system attacks you because they're all architected to resist change and withstand change. Yet that's the harder bit. And I've been dealing a lot with that over the last 2, 3, 4 years. How do you solve the immune system response in large organizations?
This is funny. You just jumped from genetic engineering to organizations. I'm following you. It's mind-boggling. It's science fiction for somebody living in the Philippines. What about the gap between the developed nations and emerging economies like the Philippines?
Yeah, so
Will it exacerbate or will it make it better?
No, we think it'll make it much better. In fact, we think it's going to reverse a number of things. Okay, if you think about Europe, right? The French are not going to adopt new technologies no matter what they do because they're so resistant to change. The Germans less so. The UK, Europe is stuck in old ways of thinking. The US is now stuck politically for 20 years. Nothing will happen. Developing environments have an enormous opportunity to leapfrog the rest of the world. Okay? I'll give you two easy examples. One is Africa had like 50 million landlines in it. You had wireless come along, and now there's 1 billion cell phones in Africa, right? And they've leapfrogged the whole wireline generation, and everything is wireless. M-Pesa, the money system in Kenya, is now more than half of the GDP of the country. And so that's one example. But if you think about solar energy coming along, right? The poorest countries in the world are the sunniest countries.
Right. Right.
So they will make themselves energy independent over the next decade and a half, completely. And all of that money spent on oil and trying to power their regeneration can now be plowed back into the country. And so we think that there'll be over the next 20 years, the entire emerging market world will leapfrog the West and the industrialized world to a whole new way of thinking that we think is very, very exciting.
Aren't you being overly optimistic? Because in many ways, many of these emerging economies are also held, the power is held by a small group of people, and they have the same resistance to change that the people who have power.
Right. It used to be that was the case,
Okay.
right? But once somebody can get their hands on 3D printers or drones or CRISPR, they're going to do things with it independent of what the power structures want. Bitcoin, for example, can't be stopped. It can just be slowed down a bit, but it can't be stopped. And so the internet is too important for most economies now to get rid of it. You just shoot yourself in the foot if you do it. So right now there's short-term backlash from governments against the internet and other technologies, but it's certainly not sustainable. And now that you have all of these other technologies, by the way, which are all absurdly cheap or free to use in many cases, and open source, we'll see radical change happening across the board because all these technologies become democratized so quickly that people can use them however they want. In India, for example, the mobile phone market has exploded because the government simply hasn't had time to regulate.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? And this is why we get excited about things, because now things are moving away from the ability for any top-down authoritative structure to keep a lid on
To
it.
choke it, right?
Yeah.
That's right. So, I guess for us in who are not in Silicon Valley, what advice would you give to people who have power, to governments to try to leapfrog development? What do they need to do?
Well, first of all, they should get educated on what's
Technology,
happening.
right?
Yeah, like nothing. What I've said to you may sound like science fiction, but it's all real today. There's nothing futuristic about it, right? Autonomous cars are here already, and so they should be aware of it, because as they make policy decisions, they can make much more forward-thinking policy decisions than ever before. The second is to start running a series of experiments, because something else that's magic about these new technologies is they don't cost much. They're
Yes.
mostly free. So you can try things out. Now, making dramatic change today simply comes down to mindset. It's not money and it's not access to technology. You just need people with the mindset. Look at Elon Musk.
Yeah.
It used to be that disruptive innovation was only possible with a government or a large corporate lab. Here's a single individual who has no experience in the car sector, energy sector, space sector, and yet he's created dramatic things. Because what he does, he goes into a legacy industry with a beginner's mind, leverages new technologies, and off you go. And as that model starts being copied by aspiring entrepreneurs, and the thing about developing countries and emerging markets is the entrepreneurs there are hungry.
Yes.
Right? They will do whatever they can. And so when you take that hunger and that desire and that ambition and apply it just with mindset, you will have some extraordinary things happen. And we're starting to see that now. We think the next Zuckerbergs and Larry Pages will not come from the West. They'll come from the emerging markets.
Which countries are you looking at? Where are you seeing this?
We're seeing this pretty much across the board. Now, there's one problem in sort of Latin America, for example, extraordinary explosion happening there, except they have a lot of corruption to deal with, right?
Right.
In Africa, they have huge potential. They have infrastructure issues and governance issues. The big challenge I see in Southeast Asia is really there's not a willingness to fail.
Yes.
People, if you want to, the bigger the change you want to make, the bigger the risk that you take. And so you have to be willing, and I'll give you an easy suggestion for you that you could do with Rappler. Have an award ceremony every year. Find the 3 entrepreneurs that made the biggest risk and went for the biggest change and failed, and put them on TV, make them famous, reward them, and make it socially acceptable to make big change and aggressively try big things. And you'll start to change the culture and the narrative by which people operate. More people will try it, and then you'll see dramatic change happening.
Let's switch to businesses. What advice would you give to CEOs, to people who are running large businesses first and then entrepreneurs?
Okay. Large businesses are in particular threat because they're all set up to operate efficiently and predictability. That's the higher order bit. Yet the world is operating disruptively, and it takes a long time to kind of turn a supertanker if you're a large organization. Large organizations need to aggressively change how they think about the world. I do today a lot of half-day board workshops for the Fortune 50 because every major company I can see is under threat. You take BMW as an example, right? Their tagline is, "We're the ultimate driving machine," and we're pretty clear nobody's going to be driving. So that's a pretty big tension you have to navigate if you're their case. And the board has to give the management permission to radically change the company. If they don't, they have a fairly severe existential threat from entrepreneurs today. Right? So that's the issue. And that's something in the book I've dealt with. Almost half the book deals with what do you do with a legacy organization.
Right.
And by the way, I'm very excited. We think we've solved that problem. I think we've solved the immune system response in large organizations.
And how?
What we do is we run a 10-week process inside a large organization, and the value proposition is we can move your management thinking 3 years ahead in 3 months. And so we're very excited about that possibility. And we're now starting to apply that to cities and saying, let's rapidly change the mentality of how you think about infrastructure and so on. And we're doing that today with a couple of cities in Latin America. So that's large organizations. They have a dire need to do this. Entrepreneurs have all of the advantage today because you can go in and attack a legacy marketplace with a new mindset. The new technologies cost very little, and you can totally, it's like a playground today. And so essentially you can just go nuts. And a large organization is going to have a tough time slowing you down because they take such a long time to adapt.
Except the
Right?
pace of change, even for an entrepreneur, is so fast that you
Exactly.
get like 3 months and it's shifted already, right?
It has. I mean, I would hate to be a tablet manufacturer today, because by the time you've designed your tablet, that tablet's out of date, right? So
Right.
it's a very, but if you can figure out how to navigate that, and an entrepreneur has a better chance because they're learning better and they're learning faster. And all startups today are rapid, are their real expertise is how do you learn quickly?
Right.
And
How
when
do
you
you learn
learn
it and
quickly,
adapt and implement?
that's right. That's right. So all of the organization structures, and this is partly what we've tried to identify in the book, that we're seeing now over 100 organizations that are operating at a 10x better pace of change than their competitors. And when you can harness that pace of change and learn to roll with it, you have an enormous advantage over the legacy systems, and you can attack aggressively new marketplaces very quickly.
Fantastic. The last part I want to ask you is uh, this is a lot. This is great stuff. It is exciting. It's wonderful to feel your excitement. What does this do for the search for meaning? When the pace of change moves so fast that you keep letting go, letting go, letting go. I mean, we talked about the impact on political systems. We talked about I guess, how do people find meaning now when things come at you so fast and you have to let go of things so fast?
Yeah, so I'll be kind of counter intuitive here. You would think that would make you lose meaning, but actually, what we find is this new pace of change actually augments our humanity. If I leave my cell phone at home, I'm actually less human. My memory's in there, my ability to video with my son is in there, my ability to empathize with an earthquake in Italy is in there. And so who I am is now wrapped around my smartphone, right? And you can see that in any teenager today. Um, so what that does, rather than replace my humanity, it actually augments my humanity. And as we rapidly change the world and empower ourselves with new technologies, we're finding that it's augmenting humanity in people, not replacing it. I heard the phrase at our global summit, we're much more like Iron Man than Terminator. Right? We're augmenting the human ability, not replacing it.
So that makes sense if you're talking about things like artificial intelligence and
But same with robotics, biotech, neuroscience, solar energy, the fact that I can have a solar powered device anywhere in the world, it will actually amplify my humanity, not detract from it.
what about how you think about meaning and how, well, the flip side, you actually mentioned a movement towards fundamentalism.
Yeah.
Every time we've seen, Singapore is a perfect example, when the government took care of housing, food, the basic necessities, all of a sudden they were looking for meaning, and we actually saw the growth of an Al-Qaeda linked group there. Right? The
Yeah.
fundamentalism part, I guess, where do people find meaning in this type of world?
Well, that's a good question. I think where we really do is the interactions and relationships with each other, right? Now, if you don't have the ability to, if you don't use technology to augment that empathy, and et cetera, then you fall back and you go backwards, right? So really, your only choice is to actually move forward as quickly as possible. What we have to do is find a kind of a path via narrative and a new paradigm for people that are having a tough time and let them migrate. And actually, that's some of the work that you're doing, and I applaud much of your work because you're trying to help bring people along in that way.
It's tough. I guess your last words of advice to humanity as we try to grapple with this exponential growth that technology
You
is
know,
bringing.
yeah, Kevin Kelly wrote this book, What Technology Wants, and he identifies that the technology is now moving at its pace.
Yeah.
George Bush, for religious reasons, tried to stop stem cell research. All the researchers went to China, Australia, Canada, and the US went from number 1 to number 8 in the world. So we are not able now to slow it down. We just have to, the only option is to keep pace of it. If we can be ahead of it and keep pace with this pace of change, it will afford us extraordinary possibilities, and we will solve most of the grand challenges in the world.
Which is what Singularity University is trying to do, right? For you,
That's right.
how do you hold on? What drives you as a person so that you stay ahead of it?
Well, I'm moderating many of our programs, so I've heard maybe my secret superpowers. I've heard all of our lecturers and speakers for 8 years. So, as my wife says, I can pretend to speak about anything as a result. But I get enormously excited by the possibilities that now result. Within the next 10 to 20 years, we will solve the energy problem, clean water, food, hunger, housing. We will solve most of these problems. And we've never been able to do that so
Yeah.
quickly before. So that gets me very, very excited.
What about fears? Your greatest fear?
Two big ones. One is climate change is a
Yes.
huge. We're going to have to do fairly aggressive geoengineering at this point to kind of save the atmosphere. And the second is the social issue that comes from jobs. We're not really worried about job loss, but it becomes a very rapid retraining, and people aren't good at rapid changes.
Fantastic. It's been great to speak with you, Salim. Thank you so much
And
for your
likewise.
time. Please come visit the Philippines soon.
I will. Thank you for the invitation.
We've been speaking with Salim Ismail, the author of Exponential Organizations and the founding executive director of Singularity University. Guys, he's on Twitter, @Salim Ismail. Tweet him. Great ideas. Thanks again. See you soon.